back. We will create the APIM. So let me put it on the right resource group. I call it APIM. Now we have SQL. Actually, APIM, usually APIM, you have at APIM, one APIM for your organization itself. And I call it APIM Juanito Learns. Juanito Learns. Administrator email. Put my email there. Can definitely have picture insights. Let's see if we have already one. Let's put it on that one. Let's have an assigned entity. Actually, we cannot do that. We have to pick the right SKU, which is consumption. Let's give it a system assigned entity, and let's review and create. So that's gonna start creating our APIM. And let's go back to our SQL database. Let's see if it was created successfully. One thing I want to do is, I believe there is a way to restore a sample database inside this database. So we're gonna try to do that. I believe it's somewhere here. Let's see. Connecting, getting started. There used to be a way to restore I'm downloading the Azure Data Studio. It allows you to connect to a database. So I'm gonna download it from me. While that's downloading, let me go back to here, and I believe there was somewhere where we could restore a sample database. I believe it's in the overview and the tutorials. Features. Nope. Restore. That's not it. Let's close that out. Should be a way to restore that. Well, if we cannot restore a sample database, let me go back to the server and see if we can do it from the server, because we're looking at the SQL database itself and not the server. Import database there. Nope. Yes, about that. So there was a sample one. But that's okay. We're just gonna go to the database and just create a simple table ourselves. I'm gonna go to the query editor, to learn, and I'm going to put in the secret password that I have. And that happens when you get that That error is because your network settings are not connected yet, are not set up yet. So we have to go back to configure the network, which is on the server level. Select the networks. I want to add my client IP. And allow Azure services to do it. I'm gonna click save. And now I'm gonna go back to my SQL databases, and I'm gonna try to connect again. And now, as you can see, I was able to connect because the networking setup part of it is done. So here we're just gonna create a new table. I don't think it's gonna let me create a new table the nice way of doing it. So I'm just gonna create a store procedure, because again, all we want to demonstrate is that we can expose an API, and usually our behavior can is expose a behavior from a database exposed via store procedures. SP, and let's call it enroll student. Let's say that it accepts first name. Oops. First name. Bar char. And then a last name. As. I might be having that incorrectly. Let me check really quickly. SQL Server Store. Parameters have to be, yep, with a parenthesis. So we're gonna do this. No, I believe I do need parentheses in there. I'm not sure why they're not. That. But I'm gonna, and then I'm just gonna select something very dummy. I'm not gonna do any modifications yet. Just gonna do something very dummy to return. Enrollment. That's message status, and then I'm just gonna. Oh, I remember why. Huh. Sorry about that. I'm just gonna tell her that the last name. Last name and roll. I'm gonna run that. So now we should have a store procedure here. There we go. And we can call it. Run it. Run successful test. Okay. So now that we have a store procedure, now we can go ahead and create, call it from our logic apps. Now, again, these are demonstration purposes. It's just for demonstration purposes, but typically you will ensure your schemas are organized such a way that you have a schema just for the contract that you can expose. So in this case, I put it on DBO. I should have put it on a schema called API. That way I can control the access to the procedures that are defined as my public API. And then I can have other procedures in other schemas. That might be another video tutorial on how to segregate those for organization purposes. And that's also great for establishing what basically API contracts from your database to the outside world. But for now, we're just gonna put on the video because we're just gonna do it really quickly. And then we're gonna go to our Logic app and expose it from there. So I'm gonna go to my Logic app. And then again, no code is local, no code type of thing. I'm gonna start with a blank Logic app. And a trigger is what's going to trigger this flow, this Logic app, which is basically like a flow, like a diagram flow. What's it gonna trigger to start? So in our case, it's gonna be an HTTP trigger, meaning that it's gonna be an HTTP request. Like remember, APIs, most APIs are exposed via HTTP. So I'm gonna tell that it's gonna be an HTTP trigger, and it's gonna get a post. There are different meanings for these different verbs. They're called HTTP verbs. A discussion on them is probably will take another video, but basically get is for non-destructive operations. Basically, mostly read-only operations, inquiry operations that you can do over and over without affecting data. Post is mostly when you want to do a side effect on the data itself. So we're gonna pick post for now. The request URL, I believe that might be the wrong trigger. I'm so sorry. Because that should have been a request when an HTTP request is received. There you go. So that's under request, and then when an HTTP request is received, as you can see, it's automatically use a post URL, and it will be generated. The actual URL will be generated after we save the flow. And here we have to tell it what are we expecting to receive. Well, what we're expecting to receive is something called a JSON payload. A JSON is basically like a way to define a schema for JSON. JSON values. JSON values are objects defined in something called JSON, which is basically something like objects that you define in curly braces and properties like this, last name, Smith, and you can have multiple properties separated by commas. So you get a property name and a value for the property, and you can define multiple properties. First name. Okay. So we're gonna tell it that we're expecting as parameter an object that has two properties, a last name and a first name. Okay, so think of this from a very simplistic view. You can think of those as SQL parameters. It's more than that, but we'll think of like that for now. We're gonna cut this because this is actually where they're asking us for a schema, not for the actual object. So we're gonna tell that we want to use a sample payload to generate the schema. Basically, we're telling them, hey, this is an example of what we're expecting to get. Go ahead and generate a schema. So that's the schema. So saying, hey, whatever we receive, we're expecting two properties, a last name and a first name, and they're type string. String is, you can think of, it's text. It's the equivalent of varchar or even varchar. It's actually the equivalent of nvarchar, but there's no limit to the number of characters. So after we have defined that, we're gonna tell it that now that we have defined our entry point to our flow, we're gonna tell it that we want to call our SQL database. So we're gonna search for SQL here. Probably built-in or standard, maybe. to make a search faster. And we're gonna go Azure SQL. That's for MySQL. That's not what we want. Let's find SQL Server. We're gonna execute a stored procedure. And a connection name, I'll call it any name. I will call it connection equal test. We're gonna tell it that it's going to be a managed identity. That way, the logic app authenticates. Well, actually, let's just do plain password for now. SQL Server authentication. The server name, it's gonna be whatever we had before. So here, our server name is that. And our SQL database is that. Again, usually I'll put something else in here. I'll use a managed identity for now. For timing purposes, I'm not. I'm gonna paste my password there. So preferably, I will have been using a service principal, actually a managed identity, but for now, we will see that in another video. But for now, I'm just gonna use a simple password. You know what? That's a run SQL Server step. Actually, there should be one because it's asking for a gateway. And we don't need a gateway. We need is an Azure SQL Server. That's for my SQL. I do wonder why it's thinking that it's an on-premise. No, that's a SQL data warehouse. That's definitely not what we need. It is extremely interesting that it's not shown here. So let's find that out. I didn't know that. Tab, connect to Azure SQL. Consumption. So we have to use the managed connector. Yeah, that's the one we had before. Why was it asking for a gateway? Let's enable AD. Let's go to configure access. Azure Active Directory. So we are ready. Here we have Azure Active Directory on the SQL database. This is some instructions how to add, I believe is the Logic App applications, I believe, maybe. Actually, it might be for on-premise. Isn't it? Let's try and manage the application. We're gonna save our Logic App. We're gonna go here to the options. We're gonna go to identity. I'm gonna turn on. That means it's just gonna assign an identity, an AD identity, like a service principal to the Logic App itself. Go back to our designer. That's our let's go add an action. That's SQL. Much better. Let's go to SQL Server, execute tester procedure. Connection, SQL test. The name of the server is going to be error executing API servers. Why? So maybe we're missing something in the managed entity. Where it did this. In SQL Server, set up the Azure administrator. A contained user to represent the managed entity. Sounds about deeply data readers to management in the name of example. Let's try this. Go to my SQL databases. I can tap in here just in case. I'm gonna log in. I'm gonna paste that. But then in the example identity name, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our Logic Apps identity. And then we're gonna copy that identity name. All right. So we have to log in as an Active Directory user, but we don't have an Active Directory user yet because it doesn't let us set, doesn't let my own user as the admin. Okay. So we're gonna have to figure out another way of doing this. Let me go back to the username and password way. So instead of doing that, let me go to this is identity, change connection, add a new connection. Let's go connection number 2, SQL test 3. Another service principal, but we're gonna do a SQL Server authentication. Server name, we're gonna do the same thing we did before. Oh, actually, server name should be this whole thing. And the database name. Let's choose this. Name, arms. I'm gonna paste my super secret password. And connection gateway. I don't need a connection gateway. I do not need a connection gateway because it's Azure. Well, let's do Azure integrated. Let's see. So we're gonna have to set up. I'm gonna have to set up a user in Azure AD in order to be able to do the connection here. So that will be another video. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you in the next video.